Yo, what's going on, guys? It's G Miners here. Today, I actually have one of the most insane builds I have seen in all of D2. This is probably going to be a build that I start off with GMs with this season and also Master Val because it is just that strong. As you saw in the thumbnail, we pretty much have the equivalent to the OG Protective Light up at all times, which is a 50% resistance to all damage. In the last poll that I ended up posting, you guys reacted and said you really wanted to see a lot more builds on the channel. So if you happen to like this build and want to see more like it, make sure to drop a like below to let me know. Liking and watching the videos play out helps me more than you can imagine, so it's a great way to help support my content. And with that, GamerSupps is doing their final week of the Mystery March event. The latest shaker was just released today and it is in a limited quantity. Even if you're just grabbing tubs or free samples, make sure to use code GM or click the link below for 10% off your entire purchase. Thanks, guys. Okay, so getting back to the build, as you can see in the gameplay here, we are in the final part of the Last Chance mission on Legend difficulty. This is where I've started to test all my builds because if you show up here with anything that is somewhat close to subpar, all of the ads will absolutely melt you. It is a really good way to show that a build actually holds its own in endgame PvE, which holy hell, this one certainly does. On top of all the resistance we're getting, we have nearly endless health regeneration, insane grenade cooldown, and insane melee cooldown. We also end up generating a ton of elemental wells and stasis shards, so our class ability energy is going to be on great cooldown too. The question is, what are we using? Starting off on our subclass, we are running the Dusk Field Grenades. These have the shortest cooldown by far and will pair very nicely with our first aspect, which is Touch of Winter. This is going to increase the area of the Dusk Field's effect and spawn a stasis crystal at the center to blow enemies up with. We are also going to be using Grim Harvest. Each time we kill a frozen or slowed enemy, we will spawn stasis shards, which provide increased melee energy when picked up. These two aspects are going to provide us with 5 total fragment slots to use. First up, we are using Whisper of Torment. Every time we take damage, we will get a certain amount of grenade energy back. This is oftentimes huge chunks when taking a lot of damage, especially in endgame activities. Next is Whisper of Fissures. This will increase damage and explosion size when detonating crystals. This will pair super nicely with the Touch of Winter aspect. Whisper of Chains will provide us with damage resistance when standing near frozen enemies or a stasis crystal. This is going to be the first source of a few that provide us with resistance that we'll be using in this build. This is just going to be resist times 1. We will also be using Whisper of Refraction for increased class ability energy when killing enemies affected by stasis. This will come into play later when using Double Bomber on a solar subclass item. Last, but definitely not least, is Whisper of Shards. When breaking that stasis crystal that spawns from our grenades, we will now get a few seconds of insanely fast grenade regeneration, which will allow us to keep our Dusk Fields up at nearly all times. The reason we are using Dusk Fields instead of Glacier Nades in this build is because of the brand new exotic arms, Renewal Grasps. This gives an insane buff to Dusk Fields by drastically increasing their size, providing all allies inside of them with resist times 2, and reducing the damage that enemies deal while they're caught inside of the nade as well. Basically, you're going to throw this down with the biggest and baddest enemies inside of it, and when you are both in it, they can't do shit to you. In order to really get this build to synergize nicely though, we are going to need some mods. First up, as you can see on my gauntlets, we are going to be using Melee Wellmaker to spawn stasis elemental wells. And with this, we are also using double grenade kickstart. So as soon as we throw our grenade, we are going to get a huge chunk of energy back. To double the elemental wells we spawn, we are using Bountiful Wells. With the stasis well spawned on melee kills, we are going to see a huge difference in the amount of energy we get back for all abilities. And when running this with a stasis primary, I also recommend using something like Harmonic Siphon to spawn Orbs of Power. Next up on the list, we are using Elemental Shards. Now, every stasis shard we spawn will count as a stasis elemental well. We are going to be spawning upwards of 5 shards with each grenade, so our ability regen is going to get wild with this mod. It does have a cooldown, but that isn't really going to matter. And we are also using 2 thermoclastic platings for even extra resistance on this build. On our boots, we are using Well of Life along with double recuperation. As I mentioned, if you use Harmonic Siphon with a stasis primary, orbs are going to be everywhere, which will give you even more chunks of health back. Will of Life, on the other hand, will also provide us with constant health regeneration when grabbing solar elemental wells. To actually get these wells to spawn, we are going to be using Explosive Wellmaker. This will spawn wells on stasis crystal kills because it's an explosion, but I also like to use salvagers to gen these more consistently. We are also using Double Bomber. This way, every time we get our class ability up, we can quickly get even more grenade energy back. Honestly, you don't even need this because 90% of the time your grenade is available, but if you ever forget to shoot a stasis crystal or something else happens and you can't pick up an elemental well or a shard, this is a nice lifeline to have available. I will say that this build does take a little bit of practice to get working perfectly. You want to be able to manage staying in your dusk field while also throwing them at enemies who are further away to quickly freeze these enemies. So there's a bit of finesse required to maintain resistance ×3 and move from one nade to another while also grabbing all the wells and shards you spawn. Now that being said, if you are a hunter main, it is going to be hard to want to use any other build once you get this to work consistently. Once again, guys, don't forget to drop a like and sub if you found this build useful. We are trying to reach 15K subs by May before I graduate from college. Subbing is completely free. It helps me out a ton, and you can always change your mind later. Anyways, that's all for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a good one. Peace.